This is primarily an episode for my mate Rich, who's running a game soon. At the time of release for this episode, he'll have actually done it yesterday, so fingers crossed that went well. It, definitely did, but fingers crossed. I believe in him, man. He's great. Before I get into this, I wanted to let everyone listening know that Matt Colville has given so much better advice than this. But this is my personal experience and advice chucked into a podcast episode that hopefully maybe condenses down some of the advice that he gives into a more, smaller and easy to digest medium. Some of the advice I'm going to talk about might have been mentioned in the previous episode, which hopefully should appear in the top right corner of this video. If Laura did it right, and if she didn't, I'm kicking off. In any case, hopefully this will be helpful for you. Let's get down to it in today's episode of T&D&D. Where do I start is a very common question for new DMs, which I have a lot of different answers to in the long run. For one, I always try and recommend running a module for your first time. As I've said in a previous episode, Dragon of Ice by Peak and Waterdeep Dragon Heist are probably the best ones that you want to go for. The best ones seem to have dragon in the name, except Horde of the Dragon Queen. Don't do that. Even if you don't want to use a pre-written thing and you just want to do your entirely own thing and make your own campaign, it's good to check out some of the 5th edition modules to see how they format things, how things are set, so that you can kind of understand some structure if you want to properly get into the planning of this. The main place to find things that you need, for me at least, is 5e Tools. It can look a little complicated, but it compiles all of the 5th edition modules right there for you to look at. Just Google 5e Tools, it'll be there. Now, you don't even have to do that. You could just whip out OneNote and get cracking, or even store the entire thing in your head if you feel like you can. I know for sure that the most of my first couple sessions as a DM, I did not come with notes. I just came with a concept in my head, and I just went with it. And my group had a lot of fun. Managed to improv for a while. It made me feel a little more comfortable with it. In terms of, because people talk about this a lot, I love Critical Role, but it's a show that definitely ruins people's standards for D&D because they turn up to the table and think everyone's going to be Critical Role, and that just isn't going to happen. One thing is that Matt has a huge, complex, sprawling story that feels like it's been going on since session 1. You don't need that. You don't need that at all. All you need is that little starting quest that can kind of push things forward. In terms of kind of kicking off your own story, there are a lot of different ways to go about it depending on what you feel like suits you and your group the best. It's ultimately up to you. Here's a few examples for you to go off. If you want to slowly ease into the game and learn, one thing at a time, a good old tavern start is great. It's pretty common for this to happen. It's quite a popular trope that some people will make fun of. Starting in a tavern, that's awful. Don't let that deter you from using it. Taverns are the absolute best places for adventurers to meet for a lot of different reasons. Primarily because you can put anything there. There could totally be a first adventure in a tavern, or, how you get there, how you get to the first adventure. It has got infinite roleplay possibilities. Plus, it allows you at points to sit back and watch your players talk. It can be difficult to spur on roleplay between players, so many maybe make them all stick out by describing their entrance a little. This can either mean starting off a character description by pointing out a key feature or two of the character, or how they walk in, how the shadow frames their back as they loom this 7'5" tall figure with a big hammer. That's all you need to make people interested in this guy. Maybe not in that stupid voice though. It makes a player feel a little more cool when the narrator describes them a little bit and describes their awesome actions and what they're doing. And, while the players are there, quest. If people understand that this is your first time around, you don't need to be original and cool with what happens as well. Goblins have killed a citizen and ran into the forest. The mayor is offering 10 gold for each dead goblin. Incentives in treasure are great to make a party want to follow along with what happens, since they can use that to buy whatever the hell they want. And now you have a good ass place to start. There's other ways to do it as well that I believe are a little more retro. Matt Colville talked about this in some of his videos, where You start the party without any sort of introduction to each other. You set the scene around them, and then instantly throw a wrench in the works by, I don't know, maybe they're at the front of the dungeon and they go in because something's chasing them on the outside and the door's closing. Matt used that as an example. And I think that's brilliant. I think that's really cool. Something else as well is like, why not both? You're in a tavern, you get 20 minutes to kind of set the scene in the area, and then boom, something bursts out and tries to kill everyone. And that spurs on the first quest afterwards when somebody hires the party after going, hey, I like your style, kid. Or maybe the monster leads to a further clue later down the line that could reveal a big secret, etc., etc. You don't need to think too huge about this sort of stuff. Just consider how you think you want to start your campaign and where you want that to go. Here's a side note. Don't worry about the grand components of your absolutely untouchable, magnificent story. Having a couple of small, simple adventures for the party to go on that don't have any bigger picture to them is a great way to keep the game going without the pressure that's all the, you know, like popular games put on new DMs. Dimension 20, Critical Role, all those sorts of shows have such a good story that feels like it's happening all the time. The story doesn't have to happen all the time. It really doesn't. Earlier, I mentioned the goblins murdering someone. If you're feeling pretty into this concept, consider that they perhaps have a bugbear leader off somewhere else plotting to take down the nearby town. That could feed into the next element of your story until you have a fully fledged campaign in your grasp, multiple adventures strung together. However, it shouldn't be your priority to, sow seeds of the bigger picture into your campaign until all the chips fall in place and the dramatic conclusion happens. Instead, make some fun stuff for the players to do. When you're running a game, I think your priority should mostly be on the present situation and considering what interesting directions the story could go next from what the players are currently trying. I think that the fact that those sorts of campaigns go on for so long are really falsely advertising and stuff. There are some good examples of actual leveling in D&D campaigns and stuff that make a little more sense. In most other games that more professional DMs run, Critical Role's been going 120 something episodes now. The party would have already, got level 20 if that was something that they were doing, and loop back around to probably 5. You can keep that momentum going fast, pile the levels on, give the players more to do, etc., etc. It's really up to you because you can kind of learn how you like to pace things as you go along. I'd definitely recommend going faster than slower though, if you want to try and test that out, because players ultimately like it more when they get more than less levels. You got to always consider player fun. That's something that's hugely important. Are you having a tough time coming up with something? Read through the monster manual, pick something you like the look of, and think of why it's going to be a problem for the party to overcome. The first quest in my campaign with a group that's still going a year later was literally started by me finding the Oni stat block and loving it. Of course, consider how balanced you think this thing is going to be for a group that you're running. Ideally, your group should be around 3 to 4 players, and CR is a decent indicator of how tough fights should be. I believe the Monster Manual or Dungeon Master's Guide goes in more depth about this, so check some of that stuff out. I think for starting player levels, to kind of go off on this little tangent about the CR stuff, should be 1 or 2 for you if you're starting out as a DM. It really helps you get a bit of a perspective for how action economy works and how the Jenga pieces of D&D fall into place, etc., etc., in terms of balance. If picking something randomly from the Monster Manual isn't working for you, what media have you been consuming recently? Is there a TV show? Is there a film? Is there a game? Anything. Think of something cool for that, shift some names and smaller components around, put it in your game. A good example of me doing this was with a dungeon I'd made that was essentially stolen from Persona 5, the Casino Palace in particular. I mixed up some names, made the place owned by a mischievous archfey. That was the place done. If players find out, I don't think they have any reason to be mad or upset if they realise, but that monster's from The Witcher. It is rare that there are any original ideas in the world due to how many things there are. Not just in D&D, in the wider world. You can't make original things anymore. You can only take existing concepts and change them. It's really hard to come up with something new. The Dungeon Master's Guide has a section purely dedicated to media to read, watch, and play to help you find some things to work with. Even Wizards of the Coast is like, yep, go steal ideas. I think that's perfect. And honestly, something that I found really useful is going in modules that people don't seem to like and picking out the good parts and putting them in my games. I read through Horde of the Dragon Queen. I hated it. I liked the travel segment idea where you go on a caravan with mostly the party, but there might be a couple NPCs that are doing some weird shit. Apparently there's one guy who's mistreating his horse or something, and that could be an interesting roleplay situation to get in, so I intend to use that at some point. I liked that idea in that book, even if the public and me myself don't actually like the book as a whole. We, can find good things out of anything bad. The D&D modules are really good at presenting the information that they need to present most of the time as well, so it can be really easy to find what you want. Plenty of dungeon maps on there as well that you can just absolutely rip the hell off if you want to. There's I think a decent example of like a bunch that you can rip off are from Princes of the Apocalypse. There are a bunch of various small and large dungeon maps with sprawling areas and stuff that you can just kind of copy and paste. I can't think of any groups that I have ever met that have actually ran through Princes of the Apocalypse enough to get to some of the dungeons, or at least remember the anatomy of them. In the coming episodes, I'll probably dedicate more time to talking about some weird topics. Since we're making one of these every week, it can be difficult to come up with subjects not talked about anywhere else, so expect some weird titles in the future. Hopefully this was helpful for you, especially you, Rich. Mwah. Go absolutely wild with what you want to do, ultimately. This is your new game, and your time to experiment. Do all the stuff if you like the video. You know what I mean. Like, subscribe, comment, join the Discord in the description. I'd love to keep the conversation going, and I'm happy to answer any more questions, as are most probably the other DMs in there. Most of my audience, I believe, are Dungeon Masters who run modules and want some advice on that. So if you go in there, they might have some advice for you. Thank you for listening, folks. Please tune into the next one. You're probably going to notice that, the podcasts are getting smaller. It's because, frankly, I don't have too much to talk about on some things. Running your first game, I can only tell you so much, because ultimately this is your game. In comparison to character creation, where I can go on a million different tangents about methods and stuff that you can do with it, running a first game is exclusive to each of you, and I would absolutely love, if I could, to erase all of my D&D knowledge out of my brain and run D&D for the first time again. See you, folks.